Hi everyone, it's Colin Ellis here on Monday, the 25th of October 2021. How are you? How was the weekend? What did you get? I always ask the question, but obviously you can't answer me. It's not like anyone's ever emailed me and said, "Hey Colin, thanks so much for asking me if I had a good weekend." I did. Thank you. I've had a few emails this week, but I'll get to that. So yeah, no one ever does that. But I hope you had a good weekend. Yeah, my sports team's massively underperformed, to say the least, this week. So I'm desperately trying not to let it affect my mindset for the week. For those of you who've listened to my session on attitude and mindset, yes, I've got a bit of a stink attitude towards my sports teams. But other than that, it was pretty good because restrictions are lifted here in Melbourne, which means got to go out on Friday, got to hang out with our friends Kate and Steve in our favourite little wine place called the Wine Corner in Carlton North. Evening that started off lovely and warm, classic Melbourne, lovely and warm. I don't know, maybe 22 degrees, still spring here, so that's pretty warm, 22 degrees. And then like 3 hours later, it was howling a gale, freezing cold and pouring down with rain. But you know what? Nothing could dampen the spirits. Even better, this Tuesday I get to have a haircut, which is great. It's great that I'm still able to say this. My brothers are listening. I know you're jealous because you're both younger than me and you've got no hair, but that's okay. You've got so many other qualities. And then hopefully from next Saturday, I get to go shopping, which just like every other 52-year-old fella, I am very, very excited about. So yes, I hope wherever you are in the world, you're good, you're feeling good, and you've got a good week ahead planned. This week's coffee, which I've got here, steaming away next to me, is Finca Hartmann from Panama, which is roasted by Industry Beans in Fitzroy, Melbourne. So Fitzroy is it's probably about a 15-minute cycle for me here. Fitzroy, if you ever visit Melbourne, if you're not from Melbourne, if you ever visit here, there's a street in Fitzroy called Smith Street. It's pretty cool. You've also got Brunswick Street as well, which is really cool. They're just great areas, bars, cafes, shops. They're awesome. And Industry Beans is kind of tucked in one of the back streets, as most of the roasteries often are. And yeah, it's great. They have a great little space. So a Finca Hartmann, they've sent me a little card with all the details of the coffee, which I'll read out in a second. But this particular coffee from Panama, which is in Central America, as you know, has notes of pineapple, plum jam, and limoncello. So let me just have a little taste of this. Yes, I'm definitely getting plum jam. I'm not really getting limoncello. And also, one of the things with coffee is I can definitely taste it more when it's not boiling hot. So I'm now getting into the routine of before I record the podcast, it's just letting the coffee sit for 5 minutes so it's not scaldingly hot. It's very hard to taste anything when the coffee's taking the skin off your tongue. So anyway, so a little story about Finca Hartmann, and I love the backstory. I love to understand kind of coffee heritage. So the Hartmann estate is currently owned by the third generation of the Hartmann family. So the original owner was Mr. Alois St. Hartmann, and he was born in Czechoslovakia in the late 19th century, and he fled Czechoslovakia at the start of the First World War. He hid on a boat, and then he travelled the world basically in exile before he landed in Panama in 1911. He built a cabin in Panama, in Candela, in Panama in 1912, which has now become the estate that the coffee is grown on, which is a fabulous story. So they've been growing coffee since the early 20th century. Now, one of the things that someone asked me to explain, I'm very sorry, I can't remember who it was the 10-step process for coffee. Well, no, they didn't ask me about the 10. They said, can you explain the coffee process? So I said, yes. They could Google it. I know what you're thinking. They could Google it themselves, but maybe they just like to hear somebody else read it. They could Google it and read it and have it done in 30 seconds, but instead they're going to subject everybody who listens to the podcast with the story of coffee. So I'll do this as quickly as I possibly can, but it is 10 steps. It's 10 steps. And I remember when we owned a coffee shop way back when, I really took an interest in, I wanted to take an interest in kind of how it starts, how it finishes, right? So yeah, it's a fascinating process. So I'll share it with you now very quickly. So obviously, like everything, it starts with the seed. And they plant the seed generally during the wet season, so where it can get the most amount of moisture, where the soil stays moist. And when you plant the coffee seeds, that's really the wet season is when the roots become established. You don't want it to dry out and die. Obviously, then over the years, it takes about 4 years for coffee trees to actually bear fruit, and they bear these red cherries. And it's actually called a coffee cherry. And when it's ripe, it goes a very deep red, right? And typically, like most fruits, there's one big harvest a year. Some countries you get two, but mainly it's just one big harvest a year. And they can either be strip picked. So strip picked is where they're just stripped off the branch, usually by a machine, sometimes by hand, usually by a machine, or selectively picked, in which case you're only looking for the fully ripe ones. Because, of course, when you strip pick them, you're getting some that are ripe, some that aren't, whereas when you selectively pick them, you're getting just the right ones. But, of course, it's massively labour-intensive, more costly. But when you hear about the finest Arabica beans, then often they're selectively picked. And a good picker picks about 100 to 200 pounds of coffee cherries a day, which generally produces 20 to 40 pounds of coffee beans. The process in the cherry, so I've mentioned this before, there's two methods, because really what you've got to do is start processing it as soon as you pick. So the dry method is where you haven't got as much water, essentially. So they kind of lay out all of the cherries on massive surfaces to just dry in the sun. All right, and then they keep raking them and turning them over so they don't spoil. That can take weeks for them to kind of properly dry out, and they're looking for the moisture content to get to, a particular level. So that's the dry method, where they let them dry. The wet method removes the pulp from the cherry straight after harvesting. So then the bean itself is dried with only the parchment skin left on. So obviously the wet method is way quicker, much easier to process. Now, once they've been separated, the beans are transported to these huge tanks, these fermentation tanks. And then they stay there generally for anything up to 2 days, really, to get rid of this kind of almost like a mucus that's attached to the parchment that surrounds the actual coffee bean themselves. And then when that's complete, you can start to feel the bean, and it's really rough to the touch. And then they rinse them, and then they're ready for drying. And then they lay them out in these big slabs, and literally they dry them in the sun by putting them on like big slabbed tables, I suppose, or concrete floors. And at that point, when they're dried, it's called parchment. That's parchment coffee. And then they stick all of the beans in bags ready for export. So before we get to the exporting process, then they actually mill them. So they process it. So they get rid of that kind of parchment layer from the coffee. And then you can polish the bean if you want. So that's where there's any skin left on it. The polished beans generally are considered more superior. And then they grade and sort them depending on size and weight, colour flaws, other imperfections. It's not just a case of picking the bean and sticking it and drying it and sticking it in a sack and sending it over. There's a full-on process to it. You should really. This is why I always encourage people. Classic. I remember speaking to one guy. I love my coffee. I love it. I love it so much in the morning. It came with one of those massive lattes with milk. I'm like, dude, you can't taste the coffee. I was like, if you love coffee, drink it black. I mean, for all of the health benefits for it, as much as anything else. But I said, so much time and effort and thought and process has gone into producing this coffee. Don't spoil it with milk. I don't like the taste. You get used to it. You get used to it. You really will. Then we get to exporting it. It goes in massive bags into shipping containers, and you're looking at, I don't know, 160 million bags a year, something like that gets exported around the world. Then you've got tasting, which is called cupping. And so this is where you sip the cup. It much like wine. We have like wine tasting. You can also have coffee taste. If you get the chance to go, I highly recommend it. You start to build a bit of a palate around coffee. Then the coffee beans themselves are roasted. So this is where the coffee bean becomes brown. All right. So the roasting, the coffee bean is green, but it becomes brown when you roast it. Obviously, darkens. And those it's roasted at about 550 degrees, and then they're cooled. So you do the roasting in the country where you import it. Obviously, you don't roast it and then ship it. So you generally buy the beans and then roast it in the country that bought it, and then you grind it and brew it. And there's many different mechanisms for brewing, but I'm not going to go into those now. I'll probably go into those another time. So there's your 10 steps. 10 steps to coffee. It's an incredible process. So I always, like I've mentioned on other podcasts, really encourage you to find out where the coffee's from. Start drinking it black if you can. I just can't stop drinking milk. Do it. You get a really good appreciation of where it's from. Now, I've had three emails this week, so I'm just going to do those. The first is about vaccination. I won't mention this person's name. Lots of organisations around the world are mandating vaccinations. Do you recommend this? Well, it's everyone's choice. It's every organisation's choice. The thing that I would say about this is you've just got to be crystal clear about what the policy is. And it's got to be fact-based, of course. I actually spoke to someone last week who didn't understand that you can still carry the vaccine even when you've been vaccinated. So often I think the facts are lost in opinion. So go and find out the facts. Right, about how you catch the virus. Concentrate on the facts, not the opinions. But if as an organisation you make the decision that all staff have got to be vaccinated, again, make sure it's based on facts, and then make sure that the messaging is really, really clear. Personally, I'm rooting for everybody. Like if you've had the vaccine, which I have, double vax really early on, almost time for my booster. Good on you, doing your bit for the community, trying to keep people and mainly yourself out of hospital. Like if you're unvaccinated, well, good luck. Like, I want the best for everybody. But if your organisation is mandating vaccines, it's interesting that it's going to court here in Victoria this week, so we'll see. So that's the first one. Andrew sent me a lovely email. Thank you so much, Andrew, for that beautiful feedback. But you asked the question, the song list at the back of the book, at the back of your books is one of my favourite things, and I'm wondering why you decided to do it. Because at the back of most people's books, there's always like a list of articles that they referenced, and my book's no different. But there was never, like, people would mention books throughout, quoting from, Seth Godin, This Is Marketing, or whatever it is, Brene Brown's latest book. But I read a lot of books in order to write my book, some of which, quotes-wise, I didn't use. So I thought, well, I want to acknowledge all of those authors whose books that I've read in order to write this, even if I don't actually use any of their quotes. And then I thought, well, hang on a minute. If I'm acknowledging authors, when I'm writing my books, because I'm an extrovert, I need noise. I listen to music all the time. So, Andrew, I decided that I was going to acknowledge every single artist whose music that I listened to when I was writing my book, because they all provided a little bit of inspiration, a little bit of motivation, sometimes a few laughs along the way, some reminiscing, definitely, along the way. So I just thought, no one else is doing it. So I thought, why don't I acknowledge people whose music I listen to in the same way that I do the book? So that's why I do that. And then the last question, Jen, you asked, when is the best time to bring the team together to do culture? We've been waiting to do this in person. Is that the right thing to do? So my answer there, Jen, is it depends. It really depends on whether you feel you've got issues within the team right now. If there are things that aren't quite working as they should be, if there are team members who are struggling, now is always the right time to do something. Like if you can have it facilitated, I mean, you would expect me to say, if you can have it facilitated by me, you should definitely do it immediately and then do one a month for the next year. No. If you can have it facilitated by someone, it's definitely helpful because it means that I'm not sure, Jen, whether you're the manager, but you can join in. All right. Often when managers run the sessions themselves, they're not part of them. So, you can get someone from your HR department, your learning and development department. Someone could help you out, I'm sure. So if you feel like you've got issues, even if you're virtual now, do it now. So I've been doing lots of sessions with lots of virtual teams, although so much demand for in-person work for next year. So I think February's already booked. Like February, I've got stuff into March. Someone's booked something for September. So that's exciting. But if you don't feel you've got that many issues, just don't waste that opportunity when you come back together for the first time face to face. I'm talking to people about this now, and my program's called Culture Experience, because I think that's what it should be when you come back together, especially when you've been apart for a while. It should be an experience. There should be laughter, there should be learning, there should be reflection, there should be celebration, but ultimately there needs to be agreement on how you're going to do things going forward. So the short answer is, if you've got issues, do something now. If you don't, then absolutely wait until it's safe for you all to be back in the same room, which may be a while, it may not be. And today's podcast is about kind of the difference between hybrid and flexible working. Because I think some people are still confused about this. And so the advice that I've been given to my own clients, to people who get in touch, or to potential future clients who are like, we're thinking of going hybrid. I'm like, okay, that's cool that you're thinking about it. As I said, don't rush into anything. I think I've mentioned this on previous podcasts. Don't rush into anything. The situation we're in right now is not what I would call a hybrid normal situation. Most of us are still under stay-at-home orders. Certainly here in Victoria and Australia more generally, you've been ordered to work from home. Now that's not hybrid normal, right? Kids have been home, not hybrid normal. Hybrid normal will come when most countries return to kind of almost 90% of what we used to consider normal, I suppose, as we look to kind of step back into the world again. But there's a difference between hybrid working and flexible working. So I just want to talk about that on today's podcast. Now, remember, if you've got any questions about this or anything, you can email me at cde@culturefix.xyz, or else you can message me on LinkedIn. You can just search for Colin D. Ellis on LinkedIn. So just to be clear about what the difference is, right? So flexible working is the ability for you to be able to change your working hours and environment to cope with your personal situation. All right. So you might have young children to care for. You might have elderly parents to care for. You might have an appointment that you need to attend. All right. That's flexible working. And you can work with your organization kind of to design your week. But it's much flexible working. So organizations have a flexible working policy. Okay, so there's generally a policy that's in place that says this is what flexible working is, this is what you need to do, this is what you don't do, all of those kinds of things. So it's essentially and a way that I described it, which probably wasn't helpful to this person, was a temporary permanent agreement, right? So temporary permanent is like, this is the way that I need to work to deal with this situation for this period of time. So let's say a young parent, a parent of a young child, right? It might be for the next 2 years until you get to the point where you can drop them off at kindy. Then you might want to come into the office different hours, right? So it's temporary permanent. But ultimately what you do is you agree with your manager that that's what you're going to do for the foreseeable future. And that's the policy that you adhere to. Hybrid working is different. So everybody should have access to flexible working. Everybody. Okay, so it doesn't matter where you work. So someone said to me, well, what about factories? I said, well, factories often all you do is work with your manager and you get rotated on for different times. So even like some blue collar workers, I was working with a team of engineers and I asked this one guy, is like flexible working for you? He said, yes, because I can work with my manager to choose to do different shifts. So everyone should access to that. Whereas not everybody can have access to hybrid working. And so the example that I gave, the example that I wrote about in the hybrid handbook was a pilot, right? So if you're a pilot, you should have access to to flexible working, which means you can do different rosters at different times. You can swap roster, you can swap routes with other people because you've got an appointment to go to. You know, you might need to take your child or your parent, or you do something for your partner, you know, and you work in advance with your manager to kind of work out what that would look like. But you'll never be able to work in a hybrid way, because you always have to fly the plane from the cockpit, right? Always. I think I've used this example in the past, but there's still confusion. So organizations need to sit down and say which roles are suitable for hybrid working and which aren't. All right, so be crystal clear about what I call eligibility. Who's eligible for hybrid? Which roles are eligible for hybrid? It's not about the individual, it's about the role. Which roles are eligible? Which roles aren't eligible? And so you've got to make that clear, right? And so I wrote about this for a magazine recently. I called it office privilege. Working in an office never used to be a privilege, but now it is, if you can work in a more hybrid way, if that's what you want. Although it's important to remember, particularly if you're in Australia and you're planning your return to work, it's like, oh, you know, we want to make sure people are afraid of coming back to work. It's like they're not. What they want is clear direction, and they want to know that you're going to follow all of the health orders, right? But actually, 50% of people, 51% of people who were interviewed for a survey by Microsoft said that they wanted to get back to the office. They didn't say they wanted to get back to the office 5 days a week, but they said they wanted to get back to the office. And that often gets forgotten. It's like, oh, people have been working from home, they don't want to come back to the office. Like, you know, you're telling yourself a story. Yeah, they do want to come back to the office, but actually, for those who are in offices, they probably want a more hybrid arrangement, and they want to make sure that it's clean, because it used to be disgusting. Let's face it, the carpets were awful. All of this stuff. They don't want to cram 1,000 people into. That's a good thing, right? I mean, I'm always looking for the positives. It's just the nature of my personality. But I'm kind of thinking we'll be way more hygienic when we do go back to offices. You know, I was saying to my wife the other day, I'm not sure I'll get on a tram again without a mask, right? Even though I don't like wearing masks, I don't enjoy them at all. You know, if anything, I'm denying the world. Look at my face. Well, I like to smile at people, you know, that's just my thing. Just randomly smile at people, like, Mummy, that man's smiling at me. Actually, that sounds terrible. But you know, when you think about all the coughing and the spluttering, particularly in winter, that happens on trams, I'm definitely wearing a mask. I'm definitely wearing a mask. Same with planes, you know, definitely wearing a mask. So hopefully they'll be more hygienic, but people do want to go back to the office. So clear on who's eligible, who's not. And then you've got to really make sure that managers understand what hybrid means in practice, because some of them still don't trust staff. Some of them are working from a position of trust must be earned rather than trust can be assumed. And one of the biggest issues I think we face in our workplace is the fact that managers just don't have the right level of skills. You know, I work with a number of I'm working with 3 organizations at the minute where I've designed bespoke leadership programs, because there's no such thing as standard, right? Every organization needs something slightly different. And I think when it comes to management, people just buy generic stuff off the shelf, or kind of piecemeal things that don't really work well together. Whereas we need to give people managers, they need to know how to set expectations. They need to understand what trust is and why it needs to be assumed. They need to have courageous conversations. They need to have discipline. They need to understand what it takes to motivate and inspire different personalities. They need to understand how to communicate different messages in different ways, you know, kind of when to be directive, when to be coaching, when to be supporting, you know, and when to delegate. And so I think it's one of the biggest challenges that we've got in moving to hybrid working is managers don't have the skills. So organizations don't understand the distinction between flexible and hybrid. But if you've got that, cool, then managers need the skills to be able to kind of set the expectations and then trust people to do the right thing. Now, when they don't do the right thing, then you have the conversation. But what you don't do is deny people the opportunity to work in a more hybrid way because you don't trust them because of your own insecurities. Now, if staff can't be trusted, then that's a whole other issue. Why can't they be trusted? What expectations did they set? Why didn't they deliver? What was the follow-up? Are they on performance management track? Or are you just telling yourself it's too hard to do any of that? And so I think, hybrid is about you coming together with your team at the start of the week. And it doesn't matter whether you're a manager or a team member. You guys figuring out what work needs to be done over the next 7 days, let's say, or next 5 days, working days, and where is the best place for that work to happen. Now, if you want a kind of I guess a working day that centers around kind of dropping your kids off, picking your kids up, all of that kind of stuff, that's flexible working. All right, so then you need to agree, and most organizations offer this, right? You need to agree that with your manager. Say, I want to work flexibly, I want to drop my kids off, I want to pick them up, and blah blah blah. It's cool, right? Every organization should offer that. But hybrid working is you agreeing at the start of the week where work is best to take place. Now, some weeks that might be in the office all week because some work is just better done face to face in the office. Some weeks it might be 1 or 2 days from home. You've got people saying, you've got organizations like Apple saying, we offer hybrid working. You have to be in the office Monday, Tuesday, Thursday. It's like, that's not hybrid working. It's barely even flexible working. You're imposing a flexible working policy on everybody. Essentially, that's not hybrid working. So I think, once you understand the difference between flexible working and hybrid working, then it's about making sure that managers have got the skills such that they're able to set and hold people to those expectations. And that you don't fall back into the old ways of doing things, was it's really hard to understand where everybody is, so let's just bring everybody back into the office. No. The world of work has changed. What we need to do is leverage the benefits that's provided and use it as a basis to assume more trust of staff to do the right things regardless of where they're based, because we always work best when we're happiest, and we're happiest when we feel trusted to do the right thing. So hybrid working is about coming together at the beginning of a week, agreeing where the work needs to take place, doing it wherever you are, hitting all your targets, make it about product delivery or service delivery, never about hours worked. And then all you do is build greater trust from there. So hopefully that's provided you with some insights into flexible hybrid working. Have a fabulous week wherever you are, and look forward to chatting soon. Ta-ra for now.